Victoria Harmon looked at me the way people look at a crack in the sidewalk. Something to register and step around. I was pushing a leaf blower along the east perimeter of Harmon Defense's campus on a Tuesday morning in October when her motorcade came through the main gate. 3 black SUVs. A personal assistant already jogging alongside the lead vehicle with a tablet pressed to her chest. 2 men in dark suits scanning the grounds before the cars had fully stopped. Victoria stepped out in a slate-gray blazer and shoes that were not built for gravel, glanced toward the service path where I was standing, said something to the man beside her that made him produce a quick, contained smile. The leaf blower was too loud for me to hear the words. I have spent enough years reading rooms to know how a sentence is shaped by the face of the person listening. She walked toward the main entrance. She did not look back. My name is Marcus Cole. I am 38 years old. I maintain the grounds of Harmon Defense Solutions 5 days a week, and it's 6 in the morning and done by 3:30 every afternoon, which gives me 11 minutes to drive to Maplewood Elementary and be standing at the pickup line when Emma comes out the front doors. Emma is 8. She has her mother's dark eyes and a habit of asking questions that are several years ahead of her. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. The schedule was the constraint I built my whole life around after Diane died. Everything else arranged itself to fit. I had not missed a pickup in 4 years. I had not missed a school play, a conference, a field trip permission slip, or a science fair. When Emma forgot her lunch at home on a Wednesday in March, I had it to the school office by 9:15. These were the facts of my life in Dayton, Ohio, and I had made them deliberately. Diane died in a car accident on the interstate outside of Fort Bragg 4 years ago. She had been driving to pick Emma up from her grandmother's house. The roads were dry. The other driver ran a red light. The accident report contained only facts, and I had read it many times in the years since, looking for something the facts did not include, some arrangement of events where the outcome bent differently. There wasn't one. I took my discharge papers 6 months later and drove north until I found a town with a good school and nobody who recognized me. The groundskeeping job at Harmon Defense came through a temp agency. 40 acres of corporate campus outside of Dayton, maintained to the same precision the company projected in its work. Guidance systems, communications infrastructure, targeting software for military and government clients. The kind of company where the exterior of the grounds was as much a part of the brand as anything done inside the buildings. I was good at maintaining things. I had been doing it in one form or another for most of my adult life, just not with a leaf blower. 2 people on the campus treated me like a person rather than a piece of grounds equipment. Leonard, the head of facilities, a 60-year-old from Toledo who had known enough quiet men to understand that stillness was not the same as absence. And Sarah Mendez, an administrative coordinator in the government contracts wing, who left a paper cup of coffee on my equipment cart on cold mornings without making a thing of it and never expected conversation in return. On my end, I kept to myself. I did the work well and on time and did not require managing. Most mornings I completed the full perimeter walk before anyone senior arrived on campus, which meant I was largely invisible to the people whose opinions about me would eventually turn out to matter. The only remnant of my previous career that lived visibly in my household was a framed photograph on Emma's dresser. She had placed it there herself when she was 5, after finding it in a box I had not opened since the move. The photograph showed 7 men in uniform standing together in a staging area somewhere brown and dusty that I will not name. None of us were smiling. We looked like what we were. Emma had asked me once what everyone in the picture was doing. Standing together, I told her. She accepted that and went back to coloring. She returned to the subject one Thursday evening at the kitchen table. I was checking her math homework, walking her through a multiplication problem, when she said without looking up from the page that her teacher, Miss Carolyn, had told the class that soldiers were important. "Were you important?" she asked. "I was part of something important," I said. She thought about this with the focused patience she brought to anything she was deciding how to file away. "Good," she said. "What's 6 times 7? 42, I said. She wrote it down. Victoria Harmon was 39 years old and had run Harmon Defense Solutions for 6 years, since her father stepped down following a health issue. She had inherited a company that operated on relationships and handshakes, and had spent 6 years reorienting it toward technical specification and contract discipline. The procurement environment demanded it, and she had done the work. That part of her story was real, and it was not nothing. But the way she occupied a room told a different part of the story. She moved through every space on the campus, as though the space had been informed of her arrival and had agreed to adjust accordingly. She had 2 modes with employees below a certain pay grade: not seeing them at all, or noticing them only when something had gone wrong. The first time she spoke directly to me was in late November, 11 weeks into the job. I was clearing ice from the main walkway at 6:45 in the morning, working the stretch between the parking structure and the front entrance. The surface was slick from an overnight freeze. I had treated it once already and was on the second pass over the shaded section near the covered overhang, where shadow kept the pavement cold past dawn. She came through the parking structure on her phone, walking fast, head down, tablet in the crook of her arm. She did not look at the walkway. She hit the untreated section, and her right heel went out from under her. She caught herself on the metal railing, hard enough to mark her palm. I set down the salt spreader and asked if she was hurt. She looked at me with the flat expression of a person who has been startled and is directing the resulting anger at the nearest available surface. "This should have been done before I arrived," she said. "I started the route at 6, I said. "I'm on the second pass." She looked at the treated section behind me, at the spreader and my gloves. "Do you always do the easy sections first?" The section behind me was the longest continuous stretch on the entire route. None of it had ice remaining on it. "No," I said. She went inside. That afternoon, she sent a note through Leonard requiring full walkway treatment before the 7 o'clock shift change, regardless of weather conditions or crew arrival time. Leonard showed it to me with the expression of a man who had processed many versions of this kind of note and had made his peace with all of them. I looked at the note and understood what it was, a document that made her feel she had solved a problem she had not solved, because the problem was physics and shadow and temperature, not scheduling. I adjusted the sequence anyway. I started with the shaded sections from that point forward. 3 weeks before the Pentagon ceremony, I was on my knees in the south corridor near the loading dock, clearing a blocked drainage grate that was backing pressure into the adjacent utility room. When Victoria came through with a group of men in suits, she was walking to a conference room. She stopped when she saw me. She asked Leonard, who was standing near the doorway, why this had been scheduled during a client walkthrough. Leonard explained it was an emergency call. Victoria looked at the floor, at the grate at me. "Can it wait?" I told her waiting would risk the seal on the lower pipe fitting and that the backup was already affecting the utility room door pressure. She looked at me on the floor with the drained snake and my worn gloves, then at the suited men behind her, 2 of whom were watching the exchange with careful, neutral expressions, and she said something that was meant for me to hear. "This is exactly why I've been pushing for a different maintenance contractor. A man his age, still on his knees with a drained snake. Some people just never find the ambition to be anything more than what they are." She walked the group around me. I heard one of the men respond in a low voice. I heard her answer, but I was already back at the grate. I finished the drain, packed the tools into the service cart, and drove to the school pickup line. Emma was already on the curb, backpack straps in both hands, scanning the row of cars. She climbed in and looked at my face with the calm attention she gave to things she was deciding whether to ask about. "You look like you thought about something hard today," she said. "Old business," I said. She buckled her seatbelt. "Did you fix a thing?" "Yeah." "Good," she said, and opened her backpack. Leonard told me about the Pentagon contract ceremony the following Monday. A senior procurement committee flying in from Washington, a fixed-price agreement for guidance software across 3 military platforms, $380 million over 5 years. The ceremony would be held in the main atrium on a Friday afternoon, with a formal reception following in the executive conference wing. Harmon Defense had been working toward this contract for 2 years. Victoria's all-hands notice required maintenance personnel to complete all visible exterior work by noon on the day of the event and to remain clear of the atrium and visible corridors during both the ceremony and the reception. The south courtyard I normally handled on Friday afternoons would need to be completed Thursday instead. I adjusted the schedule. Thursday, I finished the courtyard by 2 o'clock. Friday, I had all visible work completed by 11:40 and was in the maintenance bay running a parts inventory when my phone buzzed. A text from Sarah, no message, just a name. Raymond Whitfield. 3 stars. I put the phone in my pocket and sat on the edge of the parts shelf for a moment. The bay smelled like cold concrete and machine oil. The fluorescent light above me ticked once and held. General Raymond Whitfield. I had not heard that name spoken or written in 4 years. I had not needed to. There were names that stayed filed in a part of the mind where they didn't require retrieval. I finished the inventory. I clocked out at 11:58, drove home, and changed into clean dark clothes. Then I drove back to campus and parked in the service lot at the east end, away from the main entrance where the government vehicles would be arriving. My hours were logged. My work was done. My presence at a formal Pentagon contract ceremony was not part of any job description I had ever held at Harmon Defense. The evening before, Emma had asked me to help with a school project on the American military. She needed 3 facts. We sat at the kitchen table with her textbook, and she wrote her facts in pencil in the careful, deliberate letters she used when she knew the work was going to be seen. When she finished, she looked at the page and then at me and asked if I had ever known any generals. 1 or 2, I said. She processed this. Were they nice? The best one was, I said. She closed the notebook and went to brush her teeth. I stayed at the table after she was asleep, her notebook still in front of me, the kitchen quiet, and I thought about what it had taken to become a man nobody looked at twice. The work had been deliberate. The groundskeeping, the service entrance, the worn gloves, the old truck. I had not been hiding. I had been building something specific for a specific person, and that person was 8 years old and asleep down the hall and worth every square inch of the life I had arranged around her. But there was a name on Sarah's message that made the distance between who I had been and who I was feel shorter than it had in 4 years. I sat in the service lot with the engine off. The afternoon light came low and flat across the parking structure, and somewhere on the other side of campus, inside that building, the last 2 years of Victoria Harmon's ambition were being arranged into rows of chairs and a podium and a contract worth $380 million. I thought about 14 men on a mountain. Then I got out of the truck. The service entrance on the east side of the building had a gap in its camera coverage. I had noticed this in my 3rd week on the job, not because I was looking for gaps, but because noting them was a habit that had never stopped being useful. I went in through the service corridor and followed it west along the maintenance access hallway that ran behind the main atrium. There is a service window near the HVAC relay junction on the atrium sidewall, 3 feet wide, frosted glass in a metal frame, placed there so maintenance staff could monitor interior conditions without entering a secured event space. I had used it twice in the past year. No one had questioned me near it. I stood at the window and looked through the frosted glass at the shapes on the other side. The atrium held somewhere near 60 people. I could not resolve individual faces, but I could read the arrangement. Rows of chairs facing a raised platform, a podium, flags flanking either side. The military contingent occupied the front left section, identifiable by posture alone, the uprightness that came from enough years of it to stop requiring effort. Victoria stood near the platform edge in a deep burgundy suit, speaking with 2 men in dark blazers, carrying the ease of someone standing at the center of something they have worked toward for a very long time. The ceremony had not yet formally opened. Staff moved along the edges with programs and water glasses. Guests were still finding seats. I did not see Whitfield. The man I was looking for would have been easy to miss in a crowded room. 72 years old now, by my count. Shorter than most people assumed when they heard his name. He had a way of entering a space that was the opposite of what his rank might suggest, measured, unremarkable at first look, already knowing the layout before he reached the threshold. The atrium filled over the next 10 minutes. A speaker opened with remarks about Harmon Defense's history and its relationship with the defense procurement community. Victoria was introduced to sustain applause. She spoke for approximately 8 minutes, and I caught pieces through the glass. Something about precision, something about trust, something about the future of American defense infrastructure. She was good at this. Her voice carried the assurance of a person who had memorized a speech well enough to make it sound unrehearsed. A door opened behind me. Daniel Pruitt, Victoria's vice president of operations, came down the service corridor with a radio in his hand and stopped when he saw me. He looked at my clothes, at the window, at the corridor we were both standing in. "This area is restricted during the event," he said. "I know," I said. "I was checking the air handler relay. There was a fault indicator this morning." He looked at the relay panel on the wall, which showed no active indicators, because the fault I had noted was a minor calibration flag that had resolved itself by noon. He looked back at me. "The event is ongoing," he said. "I'm heading out," I said. I started toward the service exit. I had almost reached the turn in the corridor when Victoria's voice came from the direction Pruitt had arrived from. She had stepped out of the atrium through a side access door, headset in hand, and nearly walked into me at the junction. She stopped, looked at me, looked at Pruitt. "Why is he in here?" she said. Pruitt relayed what I had told him. She looked at the relay panel, at the service window, at me. "You were watching," she said. "I was checking the panel," I said. "Through the window." I said nothing. She took the headset off and held it at her side. The corridor was quiet enough that the muffled applause from the atrium, as whoever was speaking finished a point, came through the wall clearly. "I know you've been here 4 years," she said, and her voice had the tone of a person who has decided to make something final. "And I understand that people in your position can develop an attachment to a workplace that goes beyond what the job actually calls for. But I want to be very clear with you today. This event is the most important day this company has had in 6 years. The people in that room have the ability to determine whether this company grows or stays exactly where it is. And you being in this corridor, watching through that window, is not something I'm going to allow." She took one step closer. "You are a groundskeeper, Marcus. You maintain the grass and the walkways and the drains. That is a respectable job, but it is the entirety of what you are here, and I need you to understand your place today and act accordingly. Go home. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one." She turned and went back through the side access door into the atrium. Pruitt looked at me for a moment without meeting my eyes, then followed her. I stood in the corridor. "Go home." The phrase had a weight she had not entirely intended. She meant it as a direction. She did not know it was also a description of the only thing that had kept me standing upright for 4 years. I started toward the service exit. I was 12 feet from the door when I heard it. Not a shout, not a crash. Something quieter than either of those, and for that reason more alarming. The specific drop in ambient noise that happens when a large group of people in an enclosed space all stop what they're doing at once. It was a sound I knew from other rooms in other countries, and my body had already turned back toward the atrium before I had consciously decided anything. Through the wall, a single male voice elevated past the edge of control. Then the sound of chairs moving fast. I went back to the side access door. The atrium was a different room than the one I had been watching through the frosted glass. The rows of chairs had fractured. Most guests were on their feet, backing toward the far wall, some of them speaking fast into phones. The podium was empty. Victoria's staff were pressed against the platform wall with their arms extended, the instinctive posture of people try to hold a room still with their hands. Near the front, where the military guests had been seated, a man stood facing the platform. He was in his late 40s, gray blazer over a collared shirt, no tie. His hands were at his sides, one of them gripping something I could not immediately identify from the doorway. His posture was the posture of a person who had arrived at a decision that had taken a very long time to reach and was now standing inside it. The two event security officers were positioned on opposite sides of the atrium. One had his hand on the radio at his hip. The other was speaking in a low, controlled voice, the kind of voice people produced when they were managing their own fear and try not to let it into the words. Neither of them was closing the distance. The 4 military guests, still in their seats at the front, had come to their feet but were holding their positions. Trained response. You did not escalate until you understood the shape of what you were dealing with. I scanned the room the way I had scanned rooms before this one. Exits, approach lines, the position of the person most exposed. Victoria was against the sidewall near the platform, very still. Her face was doing the thing faces do when a person who has controlled every room they have entered for years is in a room that has stopped responding to her. The man near the front spoke again. His name was Gerald Marsh. He had worked for Harmon Defense for 11 years in quality assurance and had been part of a cost reduction layoff 9 months ago. He had a daughter in her second year of college. He had sent 43 emails to the HR department over the 6 months that followed, a documented, dated, sequential record of man trying to resolve a severance dispute through the proper channels. The dispute had been closed without resolution. He said all of this in a voice that had moved well past the point where formal instructions and careful distance would reach it. I knew this voice. I had heard it in places where there was no Atrium and no corporate security team, and no one else to hand the problem to. The security officer on the left was speaking again. Standard language, firm, designed to project calm. Gerald's head moved toward the sound, and his posture shifted in the way posture shifted when a person felt managed rather than heard. I stepped through the access door into the atrium. I moved along the side wall at a pace that belonged in the room. Not fast, not slow, the movement of someone who knew exactly where he was going and had been there before. The security officers were focused on Gerald. Most of the guests were watching Gerald. I was at the edge of their vision for 3 full seconds before anyone registered me. Gerald's eyes found me when I was about 15 feet from him. I stopped. I did not put my hands up the way the officers had. I put them at my sides. I looked at him the way I had looked at men in worse positions than this. Men in places where the options had narrowed to one, and I said his name once. Just his name. No command attached to it. He looked at me. I said I heard him. I said 43 emails was not a small effort. I said that a man who had spent 11 years doing his job well deserved to have someone look him in the eye and say that plainly, without a form attached. The hand holding the object, which I could now see clearly was a thick manila folder and not what half the room had feared it was, dropped about 2 inches. That was the signal I needed. I took 3 steps forward and crouched to his level. I said one more thing, and I said it low enough that only Gerald could hear it. What I said was about his daughter, because he had mentioned her first, and because that was where the actual weight of the thing lived. Because I knew what it meant to make every decision around a child's life and have someone reduce that to an administrative inconvenience. Gerald sat down on the floor. He sat the way people sat when something they had been carrying for a long time was briefly lifted. He set the folder in his lap. He put his face in his hands. He did not cry. He just sat there, a man on the floor of a corporate atrium, breathing. I crouched beside him, and I did not move away. The security officers started moving. The room started breathing again. Voices returned to the atrium in the gradual way voices came back when a specific thing everyone had been afraid of had passed. I did not look up, but I heard it. The double doors that connected to the main lobby opened from the corridor side. A new set of footsteps entered the atrium and stopped. Stopped in the complete way that certain people stopped in rooms, not pausing, stopping, taking in the full picture before moving again. I heard the room change register around those footsteps. The specific, involuntary straightening that happened when someone with real authority entered a space. I had felt it happen in rooms I was standing in and rooms I was watching from a distance. It was not something a title created on its own. It was something earned in particular ways over a long time, and a room of military personnel felt it before they saw the rank on the collar. The footsteps did not continue toward the platform. They stopped, and in the silence that followed them, a voice I would have known in any building in any country said, with full and unhesitating clarity, to no one in the room except me, "I'll be damned." Marcus Cole. I stood up slowly. General Raymond Whitfield was crossing the atrium floor. He moved the way he had always moved, without hurry, without performance, as though the distance between where he was and where he needed to be had already been covered in his mind. The room around him was still sorting itself out. Security was with Gerald. Guests were finding their way back to their chairs or standing in small clusters, speaking low. The four military personnel from the front section had identified Whitfield the moment he entered and were already at attention. He stopped 2 feet from me. He was in dress uniform, 3 stars, ribbons, and decorations that told a longer story than anyone in this room currently had the context to read. He looked at me the way a person looked at something they had thought about for a long time and were now seeing in an arrangement they had not anticipated. Then Raymond Whitfield, Lieutenant General of the United States Army, came to full attention and saluted me. Not a nod, not an extended hand. A full salute, held for 3 seconds in front of 60 people who had come to Dayton, Ohio, to watch a contract signing. I returned it. The 4 military guests had come to attention the moment Whitfield's hand went up. When a 3-star general saluted a man in a worn work jacket, you came to attention first and sorted out the reason after. The procurement official from Washington had gone very still, hands at his sides. 2 of Victoria's staff, still pressed against the platform wall, were looking at each other with the expression of people rapidly revising a document they had considered complete. The room was completely still. Whitfield put his hand out then, and I took it, and he held it with both of his and said, low enough that it was still a private thing despite the room, that it was good to see me standing in a building with a working roof and a heater. I told him the heater had given me trouble last February. He laughed. It was a short, real laugh, and it broke something open in the room. He turned and faced the assembled guests, still at my side, and he spoke in the voice he used when he wanted words to land without extra weight added to them. He said the man standing beside him was Staff Sergeant Marcus Cole, United States Army, retired. That Marcus had served 12 years in special operations, including 3 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq. That on a night in March, in a valley in Kunar province, when 14 soldiers from his unit were pinned down and communications were out and the extraction window was closing, Marcus had gone back in. Not ordered to. Not with cover. He had gone back in because the men were there, and he was the one who knew the ground. All 14 came home. Whitfield said the Medal of Honor citation, which Marcus had never read aloud to anyone, described it as an act of extraordinary courage under fire. He said that description was accurate and also insufficient. He said he had written Marcus a letter afterward and still thought about whether the letter had said enough. Then he stopped talking. The silence that followed was not the silence of a room waiting for the next thing. It was the silence of a room that had been shown something and needed a moment before it could move again. I looked at the floor briefly, the way I always looked at the floor when someone made the mistake of treating what I had done as a performance rather than a decision. Then I looked up. Victoria Harmon was still against the sidewall where I had last seen her. Her face was doing something I had not seen it do in 4 years of working on her campus. It was not calculating the next move. It was not managing an impression. It was open, the way faces went when the story a person had been telling about the world turned out to be missing a significant page. She was looking at me, then at the man beside me, then at the distance between those 2 facts. The distance was the full length of every assumption she had made since October. I did not hold her gaze. I turned back to Whitfield and told him it was good to see him. It was. He looked older and also exactly the same, which was what happened to certain people when years went into them rather than onto them. He asked about Emma. I told him she was 8 now and had her mother's eyes and was currently in school learning state capitals. He said Diane would have been proud. I said I knew. The formal ceremony resumed 20 minutes later. Gerald Marsh was in a side room with 2 security staff and an HR coordinator who Victoria had asked, in a voice I heard from across the atrium, to stay with him until they had worked through what needed to be worked through. I did not know what that meant in practical terms. I hoped it meant something real. I left before the contract signing. I was in the service lot, sitting in the truck, when the passenger window filled with a face. Sarah Mendez, coat on, slightly out of breath. She said Victoria wanted to speak with me. I told her I had to get to the school pickup. Sarah said she knew, and that Victoria knew, and that Victoria had asked if she could come to the school pickup line. I looked at Sarah for a moment. I said she could follow in her own car. Emma came out the front doors at 3:31, scanned the pickup line, found a truck. She climbed in and dropped her backpack and started telling me about a disagreement she had with a boy in her class over a geography answer, which she had been right about. She was very clear on this, and she was midway through the account when she noticed the black car that had pulled up behind us. She looked at the car. She looked at me. "Who's that?" she said. "Someone want to talk," I said. "To you." "To both of us, I think." Victoria got out of the car. She was still in the burgundy suit from the ceremony. She walked to the driver's side, and I got out, and we stood on the sidewalk outside Maplewood Elementary, while Emma watched through the windshield with the focused attention she gave to situations she had decided were worth understanding. Victoria said she had spent the entire drive over trying to find the right place to start and had not found one. So she was going to start at the wrong place and work toward the right one. She said she had been dismissing people her entire career based on the frame around them rather than what was inside. And she had told herself this was precision, that it was sound judgment. She understood now it was a habit she had built to avoid the discomfort of being wrong about someone, and the way she had spoken to me had not been professional assessment. It was that habit operating without a check on it. She said she was sorry. She said it without anything attached to it. I listened to all of it. Then I said that I had been looked down on enough times that it no longer surprised me. But Emma was at an age where she watched how adults treated each other and filed it away, and what Victoria had said in the drain corridor was something I'd had to make a decision about on the drive home that day. I said I had decided to let it go because I did not want my daughter to see me carry something corrosive home in the name of principle. Victoria looked at Emma through the windshield. Emma did not look away. Victoria crouched to the window level. Emma rolled it down. She said she owed Emma an apology as well, that her father had done something important that afternoon, and she had told him he did not belong in the building, and she had been wrong, and she wanted Emma to know that plainly. Emma considered this with the careful patience she brought to things she was deciding how to categorize. She asked if Victoria was going to be nicer to her dad now. Victoria said yes. Emma said okay, and reached in her backpack and went back to looking for her geography worksheet. 3 months after the ceremony, I took a part-time consulting role with Harmon Defense, 2 days a week, reviewing their vendor safety protocols and contractor vetting process. The hours were arranged around the school schedule. Leonard kept me on the grounds crew the other 3 days, partly because I asked him to, and partly because he said I was the only person who treated the shaded walkway sections with appropriate seriousness. I did not stop being the person I had been the day before the ceremony. That had never been the thing I was trying to change. Gerald Marsh's severance dispute was reopened and resolved by someone senior enough to actually sign a resolution. I heard this from Sarah and did not ask for details beyond that. Victoria changed things at the company that were not announced publicly. She created a formal review channel for HR disputes that routed directly to a board subcommittee rather than through department management. These were not dramatic changes. They were the kind that mattered to the people they affected and were invisible to everyone else, which was how real corrections usually worked. She and I had coffee twice in the months that followed, in a small cafe near the main building, nothing scheduled, both times because we happened to be heading the same direction at the same hour. We talked about the work, about Emma, about a piece of the vendor protocol that needed a third pass before it was right. Once she told me she had called her father after the ceremony, the first long conversation they had managed in 2 years, and that she was still deciding what she thought about it. I said there was no deadline on that one. She looked at her coffee and said she had spent years making decisions quickly because the job required it, and that this was a different category. I said that sounded like good progress. She said that sounded like something Emma would say. I said Emma probably would say it. She had that kind of patience. Emma asked me once, on the drive home from school on a Wednesday in February, whether it had bothered me that no one at the company had known who I was. I thought about it honestly. I told her it had not. I told her the work was what mattered, that good work held its own weight even when nobody was paying attention, and that the right people always found out eventually. She thought about this with her feet up on the dashboard, which I told her to put down, and she did. She said that General Whitfield had looked at me like I was his favorite person in the whole room. I told her that was because we had been through something real together, and that people who had been through something real together looked at each other a particular way for the rest of their lives. She seemed to find this satisfying. We drove the rest of the way home in the quiet that belonged only to the two of us, The good kind, the kind that didn't need anything added to it. The kind I had built this whole life to protect. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.